Comp Tool Tuesday. Comp Tool Tuesday is a day that we, either myself or some other practitioners in the compensation industry, take a little bit of time to talk shop about different compensation practices, different programs, things we're seeing in the market, things we're hearing about from folks we work with. And today, what we're going to do is we're actually going to spend a little bit of time talking about how do you calculate what you're going to bonus people on. And what I mean by that is not how do you create a bonus program, how do you create bonus targets, but what is the amount? How do you create that amount that employees get their bonus based on? So I think we're all familiar with the idea that jobs typically have, or it may have, a bonus target, whether it be 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. But the question I have in this particular Comp Tool Tuesday is, what is that 10, 15, 5% of? Is it of salary? And if so, when? Which salary? Or does someone change salaries throughout the year? Is it the end of the year, the beginning of the year, the middle of the year? Or do you use eligible earnings, which is kind of what an employee actually earns throughout the year or throughout that performance year? So we actually ran a poll on this not too long ago, and we asked that question. We said, what do you use? What do other folks that are in my LinkedIn network use to calculate what someone's bonus target amount should be? And we posed the question, do you use salary, or do you use eligible earnings or something else? And about 58% of companies that responded, and there were 436 companies that responded, 58% of those actually said that they use salary. The other 37% said they use eligible earnings, and about 5% said they use something else, but most people didn't actually go in to explain what that something else might be. Now, since there's two big buckets that people are using, the eligible earnings and the salary, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons for each of them as it relates back to my own personal experience as a compensation manager, compensation director, calculating bonus programs and calculating bonus amounts for small tech companies and some of the biggest companies in the world. And really, I think there's two different trains of thought behind this. One is simplicity and one is accuracy. And both have their pros and cons. I think if we look at salary, that ostensibly is the simplest, it's the easiest to explain. But let's kind of walk through some of the pros and cons of using salary. Everybody understands what salary is. Everybody gets that. If my salary is $52,000 a year and my bonus target is 10%, my bonus target is $5,200. If I'm being paid $25 an hour and that nets out to $52,000 a year, again, and I got a 10% bonus target, my bonus target is still $5,200 per year. So it's really easy to understand. It's oftentimes how bonuses are communicated in offer letters, and you've got a 10% bonus target. Your salary is $100,000, so your total target compensation is $110,000. And I think that's kind of where aligns a lot of people's expectations. If I get a bonus target and a salary of $100,000 to 110%, I can reasonably expect at the end of the year I'm going to be able to add everything up and have $110,000 on my all my pay stubs. Another piece is it's easy to track and it's easy to audit. I can generally know what my salary was throughout the year. If I have a pay increase or if I go part-time, I can always kind of go back and track that. So from a communications perspective, salary is typically going to be the easiest way to communicate what your bonus target is. Now, there's some cons with it too. It's easy to communicate, but it's easy to communicate simplistically, but not necessarily precisely. What do I mean by that? Well, we have to start thinking about maybe not the 90% of folks that really kind of fall into that easy to manage bucket, but maybe the 10% or the 20% of employees that have had some kind of change with their salary throughout the year. That could be people that have gone on part-time, that have taken leaves of absences. that have had pay changes throughout the year. Well, all of a sudden it starts to become a little bit more complex, because now the question, when you think about it, for those particular individuals with these one-off cases or 10-off cases, may be different. So what do you do if an employee that was part-time, was full-time, went part-time for 2 months? What do you do if you had an employee that was on a voluntary leave of absence for a month? I mean, their salary didn't change at the end of the year. Do you bonus them on that salary, even though they weren't with the company for a period of time? What about prorations? What about employees that started off with the company, 4 months ago? Their salary is, $100,000, but they only earned $25,000 or $33,000 for that performance period. So it gets a little bit more complicated when you really start thinking about the ins and outs of how we calculate bonuses. So other pieces we look at are, prorations. That makes things a little more difficult. Part-time or employees that have gone on leave make things more difficult. Overtime. All of a sudden, now we've got to think about, how do we calculate that? And there are actually FLSA considerations when we are looking at bonuses for hourly non-exempt workers. We also want to know, do we treat our hourly workers the same? So all of a sudden, salary becomes a little bit less simple. It sounds simple, it's easy to communicate, but it's not as necessarily as precise as using eligible earnings. And so if we think about eligible earnings, which is what 37% of our folks that responded to this mentioned, eligible earnings have their cons as well. They also have their pros. So let's go through the pros first. Some of the pros are all those prorations are automatically calculated. So if you had employees that went part-time, if you had employees that took a leave of absence, if you had employees that have overtime, these numbers are all being calculated into their eligible earnings. And let's actually back up just a minute and actually talk about what are eligible earnings. Because this was something a little bit new to me, and it was something that it was easy to have a discussion around what counts as being considered eligible. And I think this is where it's really important to have a great relationship with your payroll team, because oftentimes they are the ones that are going to define what eligible earnings are as it relates to pay. Now, eligible earnings is typically going to be what you receive on your paychecks. It's typically going to be what you receive throughout the year, removing deductions, removing benefits pay, removing other things, or adding things like overtime or not spot bonuses, but adding things such as overtime or pay changes for interim assignments, or prorations based on part-time work or leave of absences. So eligible earnings is essentially what you receive throughout the year, and can be what you are bonused on. And it is something that you would probably need to work with your HR team and your payroll team, and your finance team to identify specifically what does that mean. But that's what eligible earnings are for the purpose of this conversation. Now, the nice things about eligible earnings are, again, as I was mentioning, those prorations are automatically calculated into it, because what we are doing is taking a number that people have earned throughout the year. It could be overtime. It could be periods of time where they're on leave of absence that are being pulled out. And another thing that's nice about this is it's very easily calculated, because it is oftentimes something that can come directly from the payroll system or from your payroll team. Now, it's easier to calculate this way, but it's also harder to communicate, which is, in my opinion, communication from a compensation team is one of the most critical things that we do as compensation practitioners. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have the basics down, that we can conduct market composite matching, that we can review salaries, that we can identify internal equity considerations, compression challenges, all of those things. But really, the lubrication that makes the compensation machine work so well is effective communication. And that, I think, is why eligible earnings are oftentimes not used to calculate bonuses, because it's a lot harder to communicate to our employees. So let's talk about that. Why is that hard to communicate? Well, it's hard to audit. If I'm an employee and I know I was earning $52,000 per year, and I have a 10% bonus target, and I had nothing changed for me, I can go back very easily and look at that to see what that was, or what my bonus target is. I can check that, no problem. Now, if we're thinking about eligible earnings, that gets a little bit more challenging because eligible earnings aren't always going to line up to your salary in any way that's calculatable. An employee can easily calculate. And the reason for that oftentimes is because if you look at, say, for example, your W-2 forms. W-2 forms for the employees span a calendar year, but your fiscal year or your end of year cycle may overlap those times. So you may have an employee that is earning $52,000 for the first 3 months, and then as of April 1st or March 1st, whenever they get their pay increase, they go to $57,000 a year. Well, now that employee can't take that 10% and calculate that based on $57,000 because for the first 3 months of the year, they were at $52,000. So their eligible earnings for that year and the fiscal year and the performance year may not align exactly to what their pay is. If they've had overtime, if they've taken leave, if they've, for any other reason had a situation that has changed their take-home pay, that could dramatically impact and change what their eligible earnings looks like and how they could go back and audit that. So it's quite a bit more difficult to audit. It also requires a lot more explanation because I have done this. I have seen this challenge where employees will pull out their calculator, pull out their pencil, and pull up the Excel file and try to figure out, okay, well, I think I should have gotten this, but that number is different than I expected. In fact, it's oftentimes lower than what they expected due to that overlap in fiscal year and calendar year that they may see on their W-2 statements compared to your fiscal year as a company or when they receive that pay increase. So this is a challenge, and it has to be very well communicated to employees so they understand that. It's not impossible. It just requires some very clear communication and potentially one-pagers so employees can at least understand where these numbers are coming from. Another challenge is that, even though it's a little bit simpler, it doesn't necessarily make it any easier for us to calculate bonus target changes. Now, that's a different topic that we'll talk about another time, but there are some companies that will essentially calculate an employee's bonus target and bonus pay, their bonus pay and bonus target on a daily basis, add that throughout the year and taking into consideration prorations, total pay, bonus targets, and then provide that amount as a sum to the employees. Now, that's not necessarily going to be possible with an eligible earnings. It can be done, but it's not as straightforward, again, as what we may see with the salary. So again, all this information, everything that really can be done, it can be done differently. And there's not really a right answer or wrong answer. Everything needs to be done in a way that matches your culture, aligns to your business, aligns to your compensation philosophy. And that's really should be the guiding principles for how you manage this. But I think that with most things compensation, if you're able to effectively communicate what that means, how it was calculated, that again is going to be probably one of the most critical pieces to rolling out these kinds of bonus programs or bonus pay or any changes or anything like this compensation related to your employees. So just some food for thought as many of us are coming out of our merit programs. So hopefully everything went well and there's no changes we need to make. But if there are, next year, maybe you come back and think, shoot, that was a pretty hard calculation we did this year. Is there a better way to do it? Maybe eligible earnings or salary is the better way to do it, depending on what your individual company needs are. So again, I'm Justin Hampton with the compensation tool. I'm a comp guy, just started a compensation software that helps you manage your salary surveys, price your jobs. And also we've got the most current form of real-time employer reported data that does not violate safe harbor guidelines. So if you're interested in learning more about our software or would like to join us for more Comp Tool Tuesdays, go ahead and log into our LinkedIn page. Follow me on LinkedIn, follow the Comp Tools page, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks.